So when I made the End in the Death Volume 2 video, I really did try to get it out as fast as possible. And looking back at the fact that I now have 1,300 words of notes, which is about as long as the average undergraduate thesis, I think it's safe to say it will be a certain while before that's done. However, let me get this one out to you now, because boy oh boy if this ain't my thing.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and as someone who has become known as one of the quote-unquote Alpha Legion guys on YouTube, I feel the need to cover this in its own small separate video, especially considering the video I just made before this, the long-awaited John Grammaticus rant. However, before we get into it, I would just like to say thank you so much for watching this video, and please subscribe if you have not already done so. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the new Alpha Legion lore that we have been exposed to in The End in the Death Volume 3, and my theories therein. Now, here's the thing. It's not what happens in the book, it's more so what doesn't happen. And it all centers around a character that we should know. Ingo Pech, the first captain of the Alpha Legion at this time. You see, in The End in the Death Volume 1, we meet up with Ingo Pech yet again. In reality, we had been unwittingly following him since the book Mortis, because at the end of that book, through to Warhawk, and then finally The End in the Death Volume 1, Olanius Persson and his group, including John Grammaticus, had run in with Acte, formerly Cyrene, the Blessed Lady of the Wordbearers, now an immortal perpetual. Trust me, her whole story is just really stupid. And she had with her an Alpha Legionary named Alfarius. Well, Alfarius, quote-unquote. And it is revealed in The End in the Death Volume 1 that he is actually Ingo Pech, the Alpha Legionary who John Grammaticus knew all the way from before the heresy began in the book Legion. Through a conversation between him and John, we find out that the Alpha Legion had Marines in stasis underneath the Imperial Palace. Granted, we don't know how many, but it doesn't take a lot of Marines to have a scary amount of Marine, especially considering what the Alpha Legion specializes in: surgical strikes and infiltration tactics. Now, these Marines were hard-coded with words that would force them into certain objectives depending on the situation. The two most important ones in this case are Zephon and Orpheus, because Zephon means loyalty to the Emperor, and Orpheus means turn towards chaos, either to seize control of it or fight it directly. Ingo Pech himself was sent, presumably by Alfarius, because who else would it be, to trigger Condition Zephon, and thereby waking up those Marines to a hard-coded loyalty to the Emperor. But he was intercepted by Acte, or Cyrene, who used her psychic powers to read his mind and then find out the code words, and triggered Orpheus, which would cause him to side with her, because she was on her way to focus on chaos, her plan being to turn Horus toward chaos, so that he could seize control of it and take power over it, thereby making him the vessel humanity needed to fight chaos and control it. It was a really stupid plan, but it doesn't come to anything because it gets derailed basically instantly, but that's not the point. And we should also note, this wasn't Ingo Pech acting on his own volition, because another Alpha Legionnaire from the book Legion, named Matthias Herzog, is also present in these tunnels that they're traveling through, and he actually attacks John to interrogate him. And it is later revealed by Ingo Pech, after Ingo Pech kills him to save John, that he was also running Condition Zephon. So, we know for a fact the Alpha Legion deployed multiple Marines under the objective of Zephon. Therefore, that was their stance at the end of the heresy: loyalty to the Emperor. But Ingo Pech, as we know, was compromised. He would, though, during a moment when Acte was blacked out by a Psi Damper, reveal this to John and ask for his help in removing him from the field, saying, "Find a way to take me out of the equation, because if she has me, who knows how far she could go." It's a pretty sound logic and a very ballsy thing of him to ask. So John obliges by actually sticking a mine onto the outside of his armor, which will be activated by motion. John says to him, if you move or even speak, this could go off. Now, they do have to leave him, but John promises to come back for him. But here's the kicker. He doesn't. John literally just leaves him there. We get to the end of John's story in The End in the Death Volume 3, and it's never covered on. Because John, spoiler, big spoiler, at the end has to go back and tie a series of knots throughout the path that Olanius Persson and his group had followed, because when they were passing through the Vengeful Spirit mixed with the Imperial Palace into something called the Inevitable City, they were following a trail of knots. Now, he has to go back and make sure that knot trail was tied to begin with. But the problem is, the inevitable city existed across space and time. So, he has to travel through space and time to make sure every single knot gets tied. He has this sort of Wraithbone charm thing, I forget what it is, honestly it's not important, that is helping him find the spots where they need to be. And of all things, he's using a feather of Sanguinius to cut his holes through reality for him to walk through to tie more knots, and he reasons that it will take him the rest of his life. The very last we see of him in the book is in the Great Pyrenees Mountains at the very end of the Ice Age, noticing cave paintings of antelope-like creatures and men with bows and arrows. It's honestly kind of implied that this might be the cave that the Emperor was in when he was a little kid, but that's a bit of a stretch because wall drawings and cave paintings have played a big role throughout the Emperor's life and even through the end and the death. However, it should be noted, that's what he's going to be doing for the rest of his life. He literally just pisses off to Stone Age Earth. He completely forgets about Ingo Pech, meaning he's still down there. And moreover, so are all those Marines. Now, you could argue that something happened to them when the palace was basically crumbling or the tectonic plates of Terra were shifting because everything was going to hell when Horus died, but that's too easy. If you don't see it happen, then it didn't happen. Like, you could also argue, oh, Ingo Pech maybe fell over when all the tremors were hitting and just exploded. No, it doesn't work that way. If we didn't see him die, he's not dead. That means he's still down there. And I don't think Dan Abnett would have forgotten, considering how much he likes the Alpha Legion. And that's really the crux of this whole theory, what I'm getting at here. Because not only do I believe Ingo Pech survives, I believe I know who he is. That being the Alpha Legionnaire named Deathrow. And you probably know him because he comes up in the Elizabeth Beckwin Inquisition books, the sequel to the Ravener trilogy, which is the sequel to the Eisenhorn trilogy. And we have 2 of those 3 books out so far. Dan Abnett has implied that the 3rd book, Pandemonium, is going to be coming very soon. That's what he's thrown himself into working on to cope with the loss of the horusheresy in his soul. And you know what, honestly, I feel that, Dan. One of these big references is the fact that one of the tarot cards Horus has in his personal deck, it's a long story, he made his own tarot deck, is the Maison Dieu, meaning the House of God in French, or in Warhammer terms, Ancient Frank. Now, this is a big part in the Beckwin trilogy, because she is initially trained in what she believes is an inquisitorial scholam that is training pariahs, or blanks, to serve the Inquisition. But it's actually a cognite facility, the effectively heretical Shadow Inquisition. I know, if you don't know what it means, I'm sorry, this video is going to be a pain in the ass, who are training and breeding cloned blanks in order to serve the King in Yellow. This school she's being trained in is called the Maze Undue, Mazeundue. But Beckwin, who is herself well-versed in Ancient Frank, comments on the fact that it sounds a lot like Maison Dieu, a mysterious and unknown figure who seems to be looking for the true name of the Emperor, which would give him an honestly insane amount of power, because names have incredible power in Warhammer. The King in Yellow actually backstabs the Cognite, screwing them over and sending them into near-terminal decline. They're basically on their last legs at this point. However, thanks to a book called The Commonplace Book of Lillian Chase, we find out the name of the King in Yellow, that being Constantin Valdor. People aren't sure if that's a red herring or the real thing, but we'll have to wait and see. We won't have to wait long, it seems like, by the way. And without giving away too much, we have a character reveal her name in the End of the Death Volume 3 to be Lillian Chase. I'll get into it more in the full video, which again will probably take a while, but we meet Lillian Chase in the End of the Death Volume 3. That's huge. Now again, this raises further questions than answers, but still, there's a very clear connection between Volume 3 and the upcoming book, Pandemonium. I'm getting ahead of myself here and I'm getting off track, so let me just sum this up by saying the connection between The End in the Death Volume 3 and the coming book, Beckwin Pandemonium, is about as subtle as a buckshot to the face. Okay, right when I said buckshot to the face, somebody outside my house drove over like a bottle or something, and there was a loud pop noise. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it on the recording, but if you listen back, you might be able to identify it. I think I'll leave it in just because that timing was too perfect. But this is huge. I don't think Dan Abnett would forget his own characters in a situation he put them in only 2 books prior. Clearly, there is more to Ingo Pech's story than we're seeing. Now, I don't know if there's anything to imply that Deathrow is 10,000 years old, but hey, we know there are already Alpha Legionaries in stasis, who's to say he doesn't end up there? But then that begs the question, how does he get out of that situation? Well, it could be one of two things. The first being he frees himself. John comments on this by saying, you might be able to get out your own way, but it would take a very long time, by moving your arms so slowly and in such tiny increments that eventually you can remove the device or deactivate it. And yeah, that might be it, especially since that's the one that's directly said. However, the second one, and the more interesting and probably less likely one, is he's freed by Constantin Valdor. Valdor, who by the end of the book is distraught and sitting alone in his room staring at his spear, questioning everything. Maybe, on his way sneaking out, he comes across Ingo Pech, and decides to free him. I'm not so sure about that because, why would he? Him, in that state, would probably not be willing to hear out an Alpha Legionnaire just standing there considering what he knows about them. Hey, are you loyal or traitor, Mr. Alpha Legionnaire, just standing there with a bomb on your chest? Yeah, that doesn't just track to me. However, I think that would probably be what happens considering the impact and how cool it would be. It would tie Deathrow in to the King in Yellow. Because the thing with Deathrow is that he's not working for the King in Yellow as we can tell, he's just a part of Eisenhorn's retinue who was sent to watch over Elizabeth Beckwin. But again, at the end of Beckwin Pariah, he is revealed to be an Alpha Legionnaire. So can you really trust him on anything? Can you ever truly know his motivations? I don't think so, so I think a reveal that he was working with the King could be coming. So yeah, to sum that up, I genuinely believe Deathrow is Ingo Pech, still alive 10,000 years later, and now working for the Inquisition, and possibly Constantin Valdor the King in Yellow, if the King in Yellow is Valdor. But what about those Alpha Legionnaires still in stasis under the palace? Since we haven't seen anything happen to them or hear about them being cleared out, we can only really assume that they are still there. Now, why does this matter? Because I released a video not long ago, well, fairly long ago, about a coming Alpha Legion civil war between the Loyalist and Traitor factions within the Legion. We know that they were loyal come End of Heresy. However, they do switch to being majority traitor thereafter, namely after the Battle of Escrador, where the remaining Primarch of the Legion disappeared. In my opinion, faked his own death. We do know this battle happened, it's been confirmed in multiple books like Harrowmaster and Shroud of Night, but very few people actually believe that Alfarius or Omegon or whoever died in that battle. Now, as a recap, when it comes to the quote Alpha Legion Civil War, the traitor side has leaders like Solomon Akora, as well as the unified structure of the coalescing traitor elements of the Alpha Legion, that being those older ones who have been corrupted by chaos and have lost their way, quote-unquote, and the newer ones, made from Alpha Legion gene stock and poached recruits. And the Loyalists, for their part, have those Marines who view themselves as the quote-unquote Emperor's test, meaning they fight against the Imperium to purge weaker elements, thereby strengthening it. I know it's weird logic. Omegon, should he ever return, those Marines who would side with Omegon when he returns, because a Primarch will always have that level of pull, as can be seen with Lionel Johnson in his redemption of the Fallen into the Risen, and the cloned Fulgrim, as can be seen in the Fabius Bile books, who had a whole bevy of Emperor's children ready to switch sides and be redeemed, hence why Fabius Bile removed him from the board by handing him off to Trazyn. And now we have tacit confirmation that, yes, the Alpha Legionaries under the palace are almost certainly still there, and as such, are still there and are probably ready to go for the Loyalist side should they be given the right code word. However, there's just one problem. Who would have that code word to activate them? It's been 10,000 years since anyone has been issued those commands, like Zephon, Orpheus, and all of them. Oh wait, Ingo Pech is still alive. Now, this comes with its own host of problems, that being, how would he get to Terra? He's currently in the middle of God knows where in the galaxy bumming around with Inquisitor Eisenhorn. And furthermore, why would he not have done so already? He had 10,000 years to try and get into Terra and get into the Imperial Palace. You'd think he would have seen his opportunity at some point. Again, like I said, this honestly raises more questions than answers, but it is an update in Alpha Legion lore that we really cannot afford to ignore. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think I'm just coping really hard and that Ingo Pech isn't going to play a big role? Do you guys believe I'm right that he is Deathrow, or do you think Deathrow is someone else entirely? Do you think those Alpha Legionnaires under the Imperial Palace are ever going to come up again, or is that just a dropped plot point, as has happened before? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below, especially on these Alpha Legion videos, so please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then I will see you in the next video.